I've heard it say that you can tell a lot about a person by what makes them cry or by what makes them laugh. Last July 4th, our son Owen had a big party prepared for him in Cerritos, his grandmother's house. As most know, the day of his birthday celebration coincided with the emergency brain surgery for my mom, who was diagnosed with epidural hematoma, which means her brain was bleeding. So we asked Owen, our son, if he'd like to go to the party or stay in the hospital to stay with his Lola. With tears in his eyes, Owen indicated that he would like to stay to be with his Lola. Upon the completion of the successful surgery, Owen finally saw his Lola with a bandage on her head and staples and a tube filled with blood from her brain that's draining to the side of her head, and tears ran down his face. Owen cried because he loves his grandma, his Lola, and even more than his own birthday party. The sight of her frail condition emotionally moved Owen because he loved his Lola. Our passage this morning speaks about people crying because God has finally judged Babylon, the source and the supplier and wealth and pleasure for people. They cry because they love wealth. They love the pleasure that Babylon provides. God's destruction of Babylon significantly means for them no more money, no more big homes, no fine clothing, no expensive cars, no internet, no smartphones, no social media, nothing. For this reason, people cry because their pleasure is in this world. It is the passion of their soul. Thus, the title for this morning is The Passion of Our Soul, the Response and the Reason. Indeed, you can tell a lot about a person by what makes them cry. Idolaters will cry in the final day of judgment because the passion of their soul, which is the worldly entanglements and the relationships that they have forged here in this world, are no longer here. Specifically, we will discuss the passion of our soul with at least two main ideas in mind. First, the response to the judgment, and second, the reason for the judgment. So the response and the reason. Let us consider the first, namely, the idolater's response to God's judgment against Babylon. The first response is sorrow. Everyone say sorrow. Because the source and the supplier for their worldly pleasures is no more. So they weep, they have sorrow because the source and the supply of their worldly pleasures are now gone. Chapter 18, verse 9. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and who lived in luxury with her will weep and will lament. This dual verbs, weep and lament, occurs 3 times, specifically in our passage, to emphasize the response of the dwellers of the earth, the idolaters, because their security is in earthly things. Again, in chapter 15, verse 8, while weeping and mourning. And chapter 19, while weeping and mourning. The repeated phrase of weeping and mourning over the fall of Babylon likely alludes to Jeremiah's prophecy, where Jeremiah prophesied that the fall of literal Babylon will cause some Israelites to weep and to lament because their security is gone. John therefore applies Jeremiah's prophecy about literal Babylon to the symbolic Babylon in the future. Remember, Babylon is not Iraq. It's symbolically representing the world's financial system that continues to feed idolaters with the wine of idolatry so that they're intoxicated, so that their pleasure continues to be in the things of this world over and against the pleasure that's to be found in Jesus Christ. So that's found in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 8, the literal Babylon. Suddenly Babylon has fallen and has been broken. Wail over her. Bring balm for her pain. As we have seen, Jeremiah 51, 2 weeks ago, has been a prevalent thought in the mind of John in Revelation chapter 18. He quotes it in verse 4 of Revelation 18. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins. That's likely a quotation from Jeremiah 51:45. Come out of her, my people. Let everyone save his life from the fierce anger of the Lord. So clearly, John at least has the context of Jeremiah in his mind when he talks about the weeping and the wailing over the fall of Babylon. John, moreover, I think, likely also borrows from Ezekiel's weeping and mourning precisely because of an economic collapse. Not just Babylon, but here it's talking about the fall of Tyre, Tyre, not tire like on your wheels. It's a different Tyre. It's a city. It's a city where merchants of the sea gathered. It's a hub where people make trade. So it's an important place for financial well-being. So in chapter 18, verse 9, the kings of the earth who committed fornication and who lived in luxury with her will weep and will lament while weeping and mourning. And they threw dust from their feet while weeping and mourning. The correspondences of Revelation 18, verse 9 to Ezekiel 27 is particularly staggering. The vocabulary is pretty significant too. In verse 30, they will cry bitterly. They will cast dust on their heads. You can see the color coding there, so you can see how John likely has Ezekiel also has in mind. They will swallow in ashes, and they will weep for you in bitterness with the bitter mourning. Moreover, in their wailing, they will lament over you, who is like Tyre, like her who is silent in the midst of the sea. As I mentioned, the destruction of Tyre is synonymous with the destruction of the ancient world's financial system, the ancient Wall Street. For this reason, the idolatrous Israelites, whose passion is in money and in worldly things, they too will respond with mourning and weeping and lamenting because their money is gone. Wall Street collapse. I worked so hard. I saved up so much. They're gone. I was really looking forward to spending them. It's all gone. So they weep and they lament. The first response, therefore, is sorrow and weeping among the idolaters with a judgment. But there's also another response, and that is a response of fear or scared, to keep the alliteration going. So there's only sorrow first, but there's also scared or fear, which is the second response. So in verse 18, verse 9, because they see the smoke of her burning, her here is talking about this figurative Babylon. They will stand afar because of the fear of her torment, again. And every shipmaster and everyone who sails anywhere, and the sailors and as many as they make their living by the sea, they saw the smoke of her burning, and they said, who is like the great city? So here, John twice indicates the fear of their idolaters to the smoke of her burning. That is to say, they are afraid by what they see with the destruction of Babylon, precisely because they know that they are next. Babylon is burning with smoke. That is the source and the supplier of their joy. And they're afraid, not because they care about Babylon in an altruistic way, like, oh my gosh, poor Babylon. No, they're weeping and they're mourning because they know that the supply of pleasure and materialism that Babylon gives are now gone. And more than that, they mourn because they know they are next. So their sorrow turns into fear. OMG, first, oh my gosh, sorrow. All my pleasures are gone. Their sorrow turns to fear. We're next. We are next. We have been fools all along. If you remember 2 Sundays ago, the smoke of her burning in verses 1 to 8 likely alludes to the smoldering smoke that beset the city of Sodom and Gomorrah after God's destruction upon her. In Genesis chapter 9, verse 28, and he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of a furnace. So this is talking about God's clear judgment. The specific response of fear because of a financial collapse likely alludes once more to Ezekiel 27. In verse 28, and all who handle the oar, the sailor, and all the pilots of the sea, they will stand on the land, they will make the voice heard over you, they will cry a bitter lament over you. who is like Tyre, the financial collapse. Like the book of Revelation, the idolaters in Ezekiel will fear the destruction of Tyre, not because they care about Tyre per se, but because they care about the luxury that Tyre provides. Moreover, they fear because the idolaters know that they are next. They're up. Their judgment is also forthcoming. So the response to the destruction of Babylon is sorrow first, and the sorrow turns to fear second. Now the reason why the idolaters are sorrowful and are fearful is because idolaters found their highest pleasure in the worldly things of Babylon. So why are they sorrowful and why they're fearful? Number one, their pleasure is gone. Their joy is no more. Those who committed fornication and who lived in luxury with her, again, we see the financial idea of idolatry here. No one buys their cargo anymore. The sea merchants and all the costly and splendid things perish from you, and then you will never find these things. While those who have boats in the sea gain wealth from her prosperity. John explicitly here ties, listen to this, sexual relations, fornication, to wealth. John ties sexual pleasures to money. And that is intentional. Because the highest human pleasure is sexual relations. And the idolaters, their highest pleasure is in their wealth, in their things. They get pleasure in the same way humans have sexual pleasures in the things of this world. The association of worldliness and wealth and prosperity to sexual intercourse graphically, therefore, highlights the pleasure with which idolaters partake and indulge in their worldly possessions. There's no higher joy for unbelievers than in creation, in money, in career, in family, in home, in car, in fame, and in accolades, all of which Babylon gladly provides as wine for the drunk idolaters of the earth. Sadly, when God removes Babylon, the idolaters no longer find their pleasure. There's no more joy because their joy has never been in the Creator. It has always been in creation. The reason, therefore, for the sorrow about Babylon's destruction is not about an altruistic concern for Babylon, but rather because of their selfish concern for their own pleasures. Specifically, the absence now of that pleasure. In Revelation chapter 18, verse 3, for all the nations who have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. 3 times, wealth is tied to sexual relations because that is their highest joy. You can understand why they weep. They weep because now they're castrated. No opportunity for pleasure. The real and the ultimate reason for the sorrow and fear is because the passion of their soul is not in God, but rather the passion of their soul is in their worldly possessions. Here's the real reason why. Their passion is gone. In verse 14, the fruit of the passion of your soul departed from you, and all the costly and precious things perish from you, and you will never find these things. This is emphatic in the Greek language. This is a double negative in the future subjunctive. So this is a never, ever, ever, ever find these things. Don't think about it again. Because they will never find this. This is finality. Why are they weeping and why are they afraid? Because the passion of their soul is gone. And what is the passion of their soul? What do they really live for? What do they really care about? The costly and the precious things of this world. You will never find these things ever again. The real reason why unbelievers will cry is because what makes them smile, the passion of their soul in materialism, is no longer around. Babylon is destroyed. The supplier for the passion of their soul is gone forever. Unbelievers, they like money and worldly entanglements and relationship. Not only because they give them intoxicating pleasures, but these things constitute the very passion of their being. They want nothing less than more of this world. Paul calls it in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 3, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh. Epithumia, in the original language. The passions, what drives them, is in the fleshly things of this world. But it shouldn't be like that. God created us for Him and for His joy and for His glory, so that our only pleasure only ought to be in God, in the Creator over the creation. What is the chief end of man according to the Westminster Catechism of Faith, article number 1? The chief end of man is to know God and enjoy God forever. What is the meaning of human existence? Find your joy in God. Sorrow and disappointments and despair comes from attempting to find your joy in creation over the Creator. For Christians, our passion is not of this flesh, not of this world, not in the cargoes of gold and frankincense and iPhones and homes and the cargoes of silver and 401k. Our passion is Jesus. That's what Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 3. My passion is to depart and be with Christ. That's all we should really care about. So that when our homes are gone, when our health fails, it's not that bad. We get to be with Jesus. We don't weep like the world weeps. Yeah, we're going to be sad. Oh man, I might have lost my job. But it's not the end of the world. Because our passion is in the Lord. For that is far, far, far better. Or is it? Or is it? Idolatry in its core finds pleasure and passion in creation over the Creator. And now we can understand why the merchants of this earth, the kings of this world, and all the sailors who have gained wealth from trade, they will be sorrowful and fearful once God takes away their source of pleasure, because their pleasure is not in the Lord. As I conclude, I'd like to leave you with the following challenge. And I've phrased it in twofold. Number one, unbelievers will be sorrowful and fearful when the Lord destroys symbolic Babylon which is the supply of worldly things, because their highest pleasure and passion for their existence, the passion of their soul, are no more. Therefore, let us fight as Christians to possess Jesus as our highest pleasure and Jesus as our only passion for living, so that when judgment comes, we will not sorrow and fear like the idolaters will, but rather rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. So you can tell a lot about a person by what makes them cry and what gives them pleasure, what makes them smile. How do we respond with the loss of health, cancer and death and sickness, perhaps? Or the loss of wealth, the loss of job, perhaps a demotion, or perhaps you've been stuck at a low-paying job for a long time. How do we respond? Forget God? How can I serve God who will give my mom cancer? How can I worship a God like that? What kind of a God would allow my dad to die when I was a young boy? I can't serve a God like that. You can tell a lot about a person by what makes them cry and what makes them smile. Do we really treasure God, or do we treasure the health and wealth that God gives? I pray that we can affirm what the psalmist declares in Psalm 146. I say to the Lord, "You are my Lord. I have no pleasure apart from you." I have no pleasure apart from you. Again, the psalmist declares, "Whom have I in heaven but you? There's nothing on earth I desire besides you. My heart and my flesh may fail, but you are the strength of my heart." In your presence, O Lord, there is fullness of joy. In your right hand, there are pleasures forevermore. Your word, O Lord, is to be desired more than gold, sweeter also than honey. Sweeter than honey, more to be desired than gold and silver. John Calvin puts it this way in his Institutes, this first book of the Institutes. I'll quote him. "It will not suffice," quote, "simply to hold that there is one whom all ought to honor and adore, unless we are persuaded that He, God, is a fountain of every good, and that we must seek nothing elsewhere than in Him. For until men and women recognize that they owe everything to God, that they are nourished by their Heavenly Father, that He is the author of every good, that they should seek nothing beyond God. They will therefore never yield Him willing service unless they do these things. Nay, unless they establish their complete happiness in God, they will never give themselves truly and sincerely to Him. May we indeed establish our complete joy in Christ today, lest we sorrow in the judgment tomorrow. You can tell a lot about what you are as a person by what makes you cry, by what makes you smile. Because those two things usually indicates your pleasure and your passion, what you value most. And we are warned this morning, don't value the merchants of this earth, the cargoes of fine linen, scarlet, purple clothing, silver, gold, money, success, career, education, 401k, jobs, family, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, kids. Don't hold on to these things. Don't value these things more than you value Christ. Because once those things are gone and Christ rips them from you, you can tell by what makes you cry, by what makes you smile. If you turn your back against the Lord because those things are gone, you were never really a Christian, as Calvin says. Because unless you find your complete joy in Him, you can never follow God. You can't follow Jesus. What does Jesus tell the rich young ruler? If you want to follow me, sell everything you've got and follow me. Jesus tells His own disciples, if anyone wants to follow me, let him deny himself and take up his cross, which means die. Die to this world so that you can follow Jesus. Unless we do this right now, unless you have done this, then you've been faking Christianity all along. We can't continue. There's no point of pushing forward unless right now you've made the resolve to make Jesus your only thing. It's pointless. What's the point? It's going through the motions. Christianity is not about, replacing what you did before with now better things. So before on Sundays you used to go to Vegas, now you go to church. For an evening time you used to go to parties, now you go to Bible studies. Before you listen to Metallica, now you listen to Chris Tomlin, whatever. That's not what Christianity is about. It's about being born again. It's about realizing that, man, I have no joy outside the Lord. And if I stay in this path, I'm going to die because of my sin. And I need Jesus. And once you see Him and His exceeding worth, then you made a resolve. Nothing else matters. Nothing. Only He does. Unless you guys do that or have done that, if you haven't done that, you're faking your way through church. It's all an act. Make your complete joy in Jesus. Make it your only pleasure and treasure in this world. Let's pray.
So if you hear the voice of God and it aligns with Scripture, chances are we feeling that pride? Are we feeling that turning in our stomach, those butterflies, that inclination? And will we obey? Will we be faithful? Let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time. Shall we join the cloud of witnesses in this prayer session? Not listening to the voice, not depending on what we see. For faith is the confidence of what we hope for.